Well, hello, everybody. My name is Ryan Heapy. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. We are the Hey Man, It's Okay podcast and show. This is my co host, Sky.
Hey, everybody, I am Sky, and I'm so excited for this episode that we are going to talk about today because we are talking about some kind of like maybe alternative therapies or therapies that, some people may have a heavy stigma upon, and we're going to get into that. So I thought that we would throw it over to our local professional and, knowledgeable database, Ryan.
Hey, Sky. How's it going? Um, so, I think part of the reason I wanted to talk about this today, and I guess in the umbrella of alternative therapies, I'm kind of primarily thinking of psychedelic therapies. And lately, I've been getting asked kind of more and more from clients, what, just thoughts about it, whether, how to access it. I just remembered somebody just texted me 2 days ago asking kind of, where should they go to kind of start this
Interesting.
journey. And I got trained in psychedelic slash ketamine assisted therapy almost around exactly 2 years ago, almost to the date,
Okay.
which was also kind of a very transformative weekend in and of itself, which is how I met Josh, which is therefore how Sky and I met.
Well, I'm thankful for that
Yeah.
then.
Uh-huh. Actually, Josh, I think, referring to this wonderful man named Josh Cutler, who's a mental health professional out of Washington, and he's written two books now.
Yeah.
And in the second book, it's primarily about his ketamine journey, I believe, and there's almost a chapter or two about my experience with Josh,
Oh,
and
wow.
so. Mhm. So yeah, maybe I'll talk a little bit about this training, and so actually I'll back up a bit. I have always been fascinated by alternative or altered states of mind, whether that's via psychedelics or meditation, hypnosis. These different ways that maybe we can access either parts of our brain or parts of the world. And when I was in grad school, I remember that there had been some research kind of, and this is probably almost 10 years ago, that, some big universities were finally taking on, like Johns Hopkins being one of them. And I think they're really kind of leading the way in psychedelic therapies, especially when it comes to psilocybin. There's also a big corporation called, or a nonprofit, I guess, called MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, and they're really trying to pioneer MDMA assisted psychotherapy.
Okay.
So there's different forms kind of these psychedelics, and the one that's I believe it's the only one that's legal in a clinical setting is ketamine.
Yeah,
And
that one's getting really popular these days. I think they even have like a mail-in service where you can do it at home.
And this is part of the reason I wanted to talk about this, because I am, from my own experience in getting trained in this type of therapy, I really don't like the idea of just getting mailed some lozenges and either doing them yourself without any sort of therapist, or there's recently there have been companies contacting me, seeing if I'd want to do sort of like Zoom therapy while somebody's taking, ketamine in their own home. And so part of the reason of that is, I believe, the liability of us as licensed therapists actually being with somebody, in their home, and sort of the liability that might come with that. So the training I did was, when I met Josh, was 2 years ago, from a company called Field Trip. And so again, they were using ketamine, and we're trying to do this like co-op program where therapists could, we could have our own clients. We could therefore like meet them in this absolutely beautiful setting. I got to say, they opened, somewhere around like 10 clinics kind of, just from like, I think venture capitalist money. And, there's a lot of money that's been going into this psychedelic therapy. I don't, and people really are believing that this is going to, kind of be the next big thing. I'm not so sure I believe that that's actually going to happen, kind of due to what has happened recently with this company Field Trip. But they were trying to do this co-op program where, yeah, we could bring in our own clients. We could, and they would then be screened by their either anesthesiologist or their psychiatrist for I guess, the necessity of use of the psychedelics. And so one of the kind of barriers of entry here is it's really only for treatment resistant depression. So this means like you've tried, either talk therapy for a couple of years, antidepressants, you've taken, the more traditional paths to working on depression and anxiety, and those have failed. And so if you kind of pass that, then you're okay to go through with this. And another thing I believe is like, there can't be a history of any schizophrenia, or any sort of psychotic episodes. And I believe it's also contraindicated for bipolar. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I believe that's another. There's a potential for harm, and in those cases, there is possibly a potential, that this, that taking a psychedelic could then trigger either a psychotic or a manic episode.
Okay.
So this training was fascinating. It was in Santa Monica in this beautiful office clinic setting. And I believe I don't know if you know who Ram Dass is.
I do.
But
I'm very familiar with Ram Dass. Yeah.
Awesome. So absolutely love that man. I believe they said his designer, like the person that designed his house, was the person that designed this space.
Okay.
And it totally, whether that was true or not, it definitely looked like it. It was very bohemian and comfortable, just what you'd want when you are thinking of, venturing into your first or at least maybe your first clinical setting of a psychedelic experience. And so what's kind of so fascinating about this is that you're taking a psychedelic drug in a clinical setting, which I imagine the vast majority of people, when they've tried psychedelics, it's been, with friends at a rave, in some other just very recreational form. And, here you're actually kind of being observed, and, you're around very serious, mental health and professionals and other clinicians. Which really, made the kind of just the comfortability that, you knew you were in a very safe space.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So being that ketamine is kind of the only real legal psychedelic that can be used, I believe ketamine was made first for medical use, somewhere in like the 20s, 30s, or 40s. It's been available for a really long time.
The only thing I ever heard about ketamine was when they used it at the vet.
Right. Yeah. It got the rap as the horse tranquilizer.
Yeah.
Right? It's now being used more and more and more, I believe, in the hospital setting, especially as an alternative to opiates. It has sort of a similar effect, depending on the dosage, but like they use it a lot on the battlefield.
Okay.
As a quick anesthetic that really works and, makes you dissociate. It's actually considered like a dissociative.
Okay.
And the reason they use ketamine over opiates on the battlefield is that ketamine doesn't have the same respiratory depression that a typical opiate, which fentanyl, Norco, Vicodin, hydrocodone, oxycodone, that class of drugs.
Okay, got it.
Like when you hear of overdoses from opiates, what's almost mainly happening is that, somebody's respiratory system slows down so much that they then stop breathing, and that's
Oh,
where
okay.
the
Got it.
overdose.
Yeah, there's a big fentanyl problem here in Seattle.
Yeah, yeah.
That's interesting. I
And
didn't know how it
it's,
worked.
oh, yeah. And it's tragic, at least down
Absolutely.
here, there's also a fentanyl problem. And not, at least that's what I'm hearing in the news, that it's not as much people actually using fentanyl, but it's, people doing recreational cocaine, and then it's being laced with fentanyl, and then, having overdoses. Yeah. So I guess just, yeah, kind of finishing up the story about, what the training was like. And, it was like a 4-day, uh, all day training. And the first day was kind of all psychoeducation around, what the proper use and the proper setting, and it's really kind of the whole format is that, you want to set an intention. So, you want to build rapport with the therapist, and know what the client, really wants to work on, or what they're hoping to achieve, during this experience. And then, that can take, either a session or two, or if it's a previous client, maybe you know a lot about them, and you can really work together on creating a really strong intention about, what you'd like to experience. And then, you have the actual experience itself, with the, licensed therapist. And then, you have a session or two after to integrate. And, you know, and I think it's that integration process that is most important. You'll hear people who've had these experiences, and, had some great epiphany or a big revelation, with any different psychedelic, right? But then, it's often forgotten a couple days later, and, there's not a lot of change that's happened. And that's actually been my experience with clients that I haven't done I wasn't the one guiding them. They went to, a ketamine clinic down the street, and they're often done in like packages of 6. And it's often uh, rather expensive. I believe I've heard it's something, around like $4,500 for, 6
Whoa.
different sessions.
Jeez. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's not cheap. And very few insurances cover it.
Well,
But
I
some do.
imagine.
If you're the lucky one, yeah, that it does cover it. Yeah, that's awesome. And I've probably had 6 or 7 clients, at least since I've had my private practice, that have done it on their own. And I would say like 2 out of the 6 really made, lasting change kind of from that. And I think that was really due to the fact that they really took seriously the integration part, and, maybe even had somebody take notes, while they were going through the journey. The downside to just going to a lot of these ketamine clinics, which are run, either by psychiatrists, or I believe nurse practitioners with a psych emphasis, might also be able to prescribe. And so I think there's some clinics being opened up by NPs. Most of the time, they're just going, having the experience. Nobody's really, they're in a nice, comfortable chair, and they get, like an infusion, which is, kind of like a monitored, stable dose over, usually around like an hour to an hour and a half. And there can be some major breakthroughs, right? But how are they taking those breakthroughs and applying them, going forward into their lives? Which is the big, yeah, it's the big piece. And there's a lot of research that's showing that the outcomes with a therapist are drastically more beneficial
Hmm.
than without.
Got it. Okay, so I've got a question for you. So you're talking about all of these alternative medicines. Do you think that there's a huge stigma against some of these alternative medicines here in the United States, especially? Do you think that that's affecting people's view on things and maybe the legality of these things?
Totally. I mean, I think there is probably I would have no idea what the percentages is, but there's got to be a drastic demographic of, yeah, people who would never even entertain, doing some, this sort of therapy. I think that's changing, especially over, the last 10 years with all of this research that's being done. There's, a lot of states that are decriminalizing different psychedelics. I believe California is trying to move to decriminalize most psychedelics except for MDMA, which I have my own kind of thought about why they're doing that. And I think there's money in the pharmaceutical companies that can be made, and so they might be keeping the criminalization of MDMA continued, I guess. And so maybe on a little side tangent, I believe each psychedelic kind of has its own application, maybe for a different issue that somebody wants to work on.
Okay. Different feelings, different epiphanies, different journeys.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're all very different experiences. MDMA is really so that's methyl dioxymethamphetamine, and often, back in the day, it was ecstasy. Actually, when it was originally made, it was called empathy, which is really interesting, and it would have been cool if that name would have stuck. Actually,
interesting.
But yeah, ecstasy, Molly, etc., and it has an interesting kind of. The experience there is that I hear is that it's sort of like this emotional warm blanket, and it gives you kind of this feeling of trust and safety, and definitely some positivity, definitely a lot of euphoria. And I believe this is really beneficial when it comes to wanting to work on a trauma that maybe you haven't been able to talk about, or has been something that, you really, that brings up a lot of anxiety and has a lot of triggers. So, maybe, especially for like PTSD.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of the research with MDMA has been, with veterans, and the trauma that they've, endured. There's a company called MAPS is the one really trying to pioneer that research, and they've been trying since like the mid late 70s, and they've really generated. They're a nonprofit, but I believe they've received almost like $400 million in donations already, and done a lot of research. They do a lot of therapy trainings, and those trainings are rather extensive. I believe they're kind of like 6-month programs. I don't know that a full 6-month program is necessarily called for. And the most recent update kind of there is that they've been having a lot of trouble with the decriminalization of MDMA so that it can then be used, in a clinical setting, right? So what they're doing is they're pivoting and making their own synthetic MDMA, so that their own kind of patented drug, which is sort of like a way for them to get around the DEA, and then they can, they don't have to take this, this already highly stigmatized thing and try to decriminalize it. They can make this new thing and then, put it out to the public and show all the research around that. But the problem I see there is that that's just going to turn into another big pharma, and it's going to cost a lot of money. And, you're going to have to maybe do it through this company that has the patent on this drug, therefore, like really limiting access, I think, to the public. And I guess kind of overall, maybe, I don't want this to be like a sad podcast, but I've been really disappointed by where I see a lot of this going. I feel like a lot of the people who have already done some sort of psychedelic therapy, have often done it, with either a coach, in different countries. There's people who go down to, parts of Mexico or parts of South America and do, these big ayahuasca retreats,
Yeah. Yeah.
which
Yeah.
are, like 3 or 4 day things. And,
I recently just had a friend who did that.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was their experience like? Do you know?
Man, he said it. I mean, he said it connected him with the earth. It connected him with his roots and made him be a stronger person, and it kind of changed who he was. And he said he just felt so connected and so loved, and it kind of like he's like it really solidified my purpose in life,
Oh wow.
which was really neat. And it's kind of like it's kind of been cool to watch him go through this journey.
Did he have to go somewhere? Like, what did he
Yeah,
go
I
to?
believe he was in South America. Yeah, he was in South America for a little while. I think it was several weeks that he was down there, but I'm not sure how long his ayahuasca journey was or anything.
I've heard everywhere from like, just a whole day, like almost like a 24-hour period of the journey. And I've also heard people describe almost, 2, 3, 4 day experiences, which really sounds like a lot of mental gymnastics, I
For
guess.
sure,
But
absolutely.
it could be exhausting. I know there's also like there's a whole like purging phase usually at the beginning, where people are throwing up
That's
for a
also
good
what I've
amount of
heard.
time, and then yeah, yeah. And you're in South America, and it doesn't sound like the most. It really sounds like you're going to, um, like a mental battlefield
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in a lot of ways, right? Um, um, I will tell you that the ketamine therapy is far less taxing. I didn't experience while I was there anybody purging. Um,
That's good.
the person I guided somebody,
Okay.
the second day of my training, had an incredibly transformative experience. I mean, he ended up actually, some of the things that he experienced during that experience, um, was really reconnecting with a father of his who had recently passed. And there was also this like connection to sea turtles, and he was like swimming in this sea turtle filled ocean, and he was on the floor, and it was so impactful that a few days later he ended up getting his very first tattoo, of this sea turtle, kind of commemorating,
Hmm.
both his father and that experience.
Yeah, how cool.
Yeah. And so, that typically, like I was saying before, only usually lasts about an hour to an hour and a half. At least everybody I saw was felt very safe, felt, kind of relaxed. At the same time, was really experiencing some, very deep moments. There was one person, I will say, that was when we were all kind of wrapping up for the day. I think she still seemed a little shaken up, or was kind of just still, I don't know, like kind of having trouble maybe
Okay,
processing.
makes sense.
And the doctors were all there. They assured all of us that she was, absolutely fine, and that she needed some time. And that was kind of the most intense thing I think we saw. And the next day, when we came back to talk about these experiences, and she raised her hand, she told us she entered, this training as an atheist,
Hmm.
and was therefore, and then leaving as someone who believed in God.
Oh wow.
I
What a
mean, yeah,
change.
that transformative of an experience. She didn't know, it wasn't like she found Christianity or all of a sudden became Buddhist or anything like that. But she just knew that there was something deeper and that there was, a greater connection, and something bigger than just all of us here, which was, a really beautiful thing. We all were kind of taken aback when she started speaking like this. And I mean, it was so authentic too. She was in tears talking about her experience. And yeah, just, the one thing I will say, which is why I think it is really powerful for treatment resistant depression. We've talked a few times in here, but when you get that depressed, life is very tunnel vision, right? It's like we don't see any other way out. We feel like it's going to be this way forever. And for somebody who's dealt with depression for a couple of years, I mean, it sure does. It has to feel like that, right? It really is bleak. And then you have, an experience like this, which really can kind of shift the way you've been thinking about things, or really like just give you this drastically different perspective, both in like a cognitive, like just in the way we think, but also, actually experiencing, sensation differently, experiencing music differently. Like your almost connection to the world is therefore changed. Um, yeah, it's fascinating, and so to have then somebody, to have a therapist at the beginning set your intention and sort of guide where you're going to go through this, and then have that same person kind of sitting next to you taking notes and not only making you feel safe, but also maybe helping you explore a little deeper. um, and then what I thought like the coolest part was, because as you're going through this, it can be wild, it can be intense. Sometimes you might feel like you're just holding on, and so it's difficult to kind of remember everything. Like you might have this great epiphany or this great realization, or or let's say you've got treatment resistant depression, and all of a sudden now you can see that there might be a way out. Like maybe there is something greater, maybe there is a deeper connection. And then and then after an hour and a half it wears off, and you kind of have to go back to real life. But then the next day, to then meet with your therapist again and go over, like if the therapist was taking notes, and which I was, um, to then kind of be able to give that person, just to remind them of all, kind of some of the places that they went, really helps kind of solidify. And then, I think then it's like continuing to bring that experience into your life, that makes, these treatments so different, and can be, really, I guess that's just where the transformation can really come, is taking this new insight and then bringing it into your everyday life.
Well, it's it's funny you talk about that because
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna share. Um,
Okay.
it makes me nervous because it's not something that I would typically talk about. But when you talk about these transformative experiences, and being, feeling connected and feeling like it, this huge monumental shift in who you are, and, talking about that, and I feel like I can't be my authentic self if I don't share my experience with a psychedelic assisted therapy. And, um, you know, through my mental health journey, I worked really hard on becoming who I wanted to be and aiming towards the person who I needed to become for me. And uh, there was a point where I had worked through what I thought I could work through by myself. And then I was
Mm.
introduced to the Enneagram, which we've discussed on the podcast before. And then looking through the Enneagram, they each number gives you 9 levels of health. So through, doing my research, I, kind of did a self-reflection on myself to see where I was at health wise. And I said, I think I'm at level 3, working my way to a level 2. And then, eventually, okay, cool. I worked on that. I feel so much better. I definitely feel way more there than I used to be. But I couldn't get to level 1. And one of the biggest things holding me back from level 1 was loving myself. And that's a huge thing. If you can't love yourself, it's really hard to love others, especially, with the full, love that you can give. So, I started looking into several alternative therapies and, doing some research and talking with friends and, watching YouTube videos. I did see the benefits that people had. There was actually even a Netflix documentary called How to Change Your Mind. And the second episode is about psychedelic therapy. So after kind of looking into it, I was like, it's from the earth. I guess maybe I can try this and see if it works. I had always heard bad experiences, and growing up in the community I grew up in, it was looked down upon to look at drugs because they are. I mean, they can change your mind and they can like affect you in negative ways also. And I'd always had friends who had bad mushroom trips, and I was really worried about it. But after doing all this research and seeing the mental health benefits, I was like, I think I'm ready to try something to help me grow, something to get unstuck, to figure out how to love myself. And so I found somebody who was able to provide me with some psilocybin, and I took it and went through this experience. And I set myself a journey because that's what I was told, is to set yourself like a goal, right? So my thought was, why can't I love myself? Because I feel like I've grown a lot and I've changed a lot, and like, why can't I love myself with like full with my full heart? So um I went through this journey and through this experience, and I eventually like wound up like having this like mental image of me visiting myself at younger and younger ages. And at each of these pivotal ages, I mean, I can think there's usually some big stuff going on in my life at those times. And all I did was wrap my arms around them, tell them it's okay, and then I would move on to the next one until I was about 2 or 3. And I went to this trailer where my great grandparents used to live. And I figured out that that's where the sky ego was born. That's where who I thought I needed to be was born. And I saw him. I gave him a hug. I said, "It's going to be okay." And I tapped him on the nose, and he disappeared like, in the snap for Thanos. And, I came out of that experience, and all of a sudden I felt like I could love myself. And I felt like the world was opened up to me. And something about me that is, I've really never been able to wear my shirt off or take my shirt off in front of people. Um, but after that experience, I was like, I'm the only one who thinks about that. I'm the only one who cares about that. So I've started wearing my shirt, without people. And, it was really there to get me unstuck. And I got unstuck and I moved on to the next step in my journey until I came to another point where I was stuck, and I went through another, big experience. And it's actually what led me to back to you, but right before we decided to record together for season 2. And having these experiences is something that I mean, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I definitely would not recommend it to everybody, because if you're just using it as an escape, I can understand
Yeah.
why it would give you a negative effect. But if you're using it as the tool, I mean, it was planted here on the earth. There's a reason it's here on the earth, right? And I felt so much more connected to the universe and good about my journey. And I stopped living against the wind, and I started trying to flow with it. Where is God? Where's the universe pointing me? And this has been such a cool thing to fall into and to be able to find you. And I wouldn't have done any of that without that therapy.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
It was transformative, and it
yeah.
completely helped me get unstuck.
More than anything, I think it really helps that unstuckness. I mean, it really shapes, reshapes, shakes the way we view the world. All of a sudden, there's this connectedness like never before, and um, yeah, it really just getting us out, letting us see maybe a different perspective, or a different way of thinking about something is where I see like it's real power. That the changing the way we can think, and also um, that deep connected that we are kind of all sort of in this together, and one with the earth as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I think
absolutely.
is the real power there. But also to kind of speak on that last part there is it's not something to be taken lightly. It's not something to be taken every weekend recreationally.
Yeah, no way.
Or it's often you'll hear the two most important things are set and setting,
Hmm.
and that is your mindset going into it and the setting around you.
Yeah.
That you want to be safe, that you're around somebody who can take care of you if need be.
Yeah, and I had all of those things, and I was set up, I was comfortable, I had somebody watching me, and every time I think about that experience, I just get butterflies, and it makes me happy, just because it really touched me and affected me in a good way.
Yeah, it's so cool. I'm glad you shared your story. And
I mean, there's a
as we
stigma
were
around it,
talking, yeah,
you know.
yeah,
That's
I was just gonna say,
that's why I can't. That's why I wasn't going to at first.
yeah. Sky and I were talking about this before the podcast, and feeling a little
Hesitant.
cautious,
Yeah.
apprehensive, yeah, apprehensive maybe about sharing this story due to the stigma that's out there. And that book you were talking, well, it's a Netflix show now, but
Yeah.
it was first a book
Okay.
by Michael Pollan, right? And that book I think might have done more for psychedelic therapy than maybe anything else in recent culture. Like he was a pretty respected journalist that was then taking on this very taboo subject, and took it on in such a well thought out way, that it got people talking, and then it got people, I think people were kind of going after their own experiences, which then I think, a lot of these big universities felt like they were able to take it on again. There was such a stigma during, the 60s and 70s that, really set back the psychedelic therapy. I wish I knew my research a little better, or at least the history of this, because a lot of these things, I believe acid, MDMA, um, were used by psychiatrists in I believe like the 40s and 50s. A lot of it was like
Hmm.
in couples therapy too,
Oh,
for
interesting.
couples to like connect again. Yeah. And but then it was the Timothy Leary kind of the whole counterculture and the tune in, drop out.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And, and that really gave it such a bad rap,
Well, I think
that
it can be
then
abused very
it was,
easily. All of them. I mean,
yeah,
I think they all can be
yeah,
abused. But man, there's such a benefit if you're using it right.
yeah, yeah. Well, and what's interesting is there is obviously like street use of ketamine that is can be abused. I don't think you see a lot of psilocybin abuse, and not everybody wants to do a 6 hour mind bending, exhausting, because it can take it out of you. I think, right? Yeah, but the other problem I think of recreational or using them not in a clinical setting is you also don't know what you're getting. You don't know kind of what dose you're going to have, which I thought was so cool. To be in a clinical setting and have people monitoring your vitals and making sure that you got pharmaceutical grade, FDA approved or whatever.
Yeah, actually, I heard about this one. I heard about this one in Jamaica, called Blue Portal, that does that. They have medical grade mushrooms, and they kind of get to know you a little bit the first couple days. Then they give you the right dosage for you to have the experience that you want to have, and to help you through it. And that's all. It's all so intriguing to me. Like, the mind is so intriguing to me about how it works and how these things help us, like they do.
A lot of the talk during the training was, that some of these things can kind of activate this inner healer in us, that, whether you believe that may be, an external spiritual connection or that there's something, deep inside us that then gets activated and, works us through some of our issues or just reconnects us with why why we're here in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, I guess maybe just to wrap it up here. Did we touch on the lozenges?
No, we didn't really.
Yeah, so recently I've been contacted by a handful of companies that they send out these ketamine lozenges,
Okay.
which I believe are drastically different than the either intramuscular or intravenous, like the IV or IM application of
Okay.
ketamine. And they ship you out, I guess, a few of these things, and then you're either supposed to just do it at home by yourself, or you can possibly do it with a therapist over Zoom. I kind of frown upon that idea. I don't think that ketamine has the same power or potential as the IM or IV
Yeah.
use. And also, I think you really want somebody there. You want somebody next to you, and sometimes it's just hearing that that's all right. I could kind of only imagine all the problems. I also think it's kind of wild, that if I were to just take a dose of ketamine right now, that I then want to stay on a Zoom call for an hour and talk to you, or even I might not even have the wherewithal to figure out what's going on here. So that doesn't sound as appealing,
No.
and I think and maybe I'll end with suggestions. If you can do it in a clinical setting, absolutely. If you can find a way to get a licensed therapist, like there are some ketamine clinics that just will put you in a lazy boy and hook you up to an IV and listen to some music and you just have your experience. If you can find a place that actually has a therapist on site helping you along, walking you through, and even better if you can get one that you can meet with beforehand that can then set an intention with you, then actually be there for the journey, and then help you integrate all of those things later. I mean, that should be the way it's done and the gold standard. Unfortunately, that is also the most costly, and to have a therapist sit with you for that amount of time isn't cheap. But I think that's if you're looking for a way to do it, that's the way you got to go. And I think that's where you'll get the greatest benefit out of it.
Yeah, and I've got to say, we're not promoting drug use. We're not promoting recreational use of these things by any means. We just simply like to get the information out there and to maybe share some opinions and maybe to share some feelings that we've had ourselves. So please consult a therapist before you try anything. Don't try to do this on your own the first time. Make sure you do your research. Make sure you're safe. Make sure you've got support.
Yeah, yeah, and I think this kind of conversation is important because I keep seeing on Instagram all sorts of different companies that are advertising, whether it's legal or illegal or under the table kind of stuff. So do the research, find a place that has a great reputation, that they know what they're talking about. And if it can come with a licensed therapist, by all means, use that. If done right and the right the right setting, they can be just incredibly, like you said, about your experience, totally transformative,
world breaking.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Like in general talk therapy, right? We often are trying to get people to see a different perspective or look at something in a different way. This is often, kind of a real shortcut or a real direct route, like a blast off to, actually, experiencing a different perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, great. I think that we got some good information out there today. And, Ryan, you're such an expert on this stuff. Thanks for sharing all of that information and the stories and your training in this therapy, because it's awesome. And I think that there's some future applications that hopefully are coming soon for people who are dealing with some severe mental health issues.
I've told you I'm kind of on the fence about where this actually goes, and for no other reason than either the logistics of it or big pharma,
right?
Or and I have this terrible dread that somehow big pharma is going to find a way to take it over, and and it's only going to end up being accessible to the same people that it's accessible to now. The people that can, afford a trip down to South America with a shaman,
right?
Or a $5,000, package, at a local clinic. So, yeah, I really hope it moves in the right direction.
Yeah,
and that the stigma is also washed away as well.
Yeah. Well, all we can do is talk about it and work on it, right? Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining Ryan and I for another episode of Hey Man, It's Okay. Make sure to check out our Facebook, our TikTok, our Instagram, all at Hey Man, It's Okay. YouTube.co/, it's a long one. We're working on changing it. Go to our website. The YouTube link is on our website, heymanitsokay.com. And okay is just okay, not OKAY. So until next time, I'm Sky, and it's okay to not be okay.
Thank you, guys. Take care.